Welcome back to Educator.com. Today we're going to go over the final 30 questions for the 1999 released AP multiple choice exam found on the College Board. So let's get straight to the material here. Okay, question number 31. McCulloch versus Maryland. What is important about McCulloch v. Maryland? So basically, the Supreme Court's principle that was established in McCulloch versus Maryland was that states cannot interfere or tax legitimate federal government activities. States cannot tax or interfere with federal government. Basically, the phrase that came about with McCulloch versus Maryland was that the power to tax basically equates to the power to destroy. And so the whole idea of the supremacy clause, in case where federal law and state law conflict, the supremacy clause is that the federal law is the law of the land, and McCulloch versus Maryland basically established that order. The judicial branch cannot intervene in political disputes between the President and Congress. No, that was not established. Federal Bill of Rights places no limitations on states. No. Federal government has the power to regulate commerce. That's true, but that wasn't the case here. And E, it's the judiciary's authority to interpret the Constitution. Again, that's really not what McCulloch versus Maryland is all about. Question number 32. Political socialization. What is political socialization? So if you come across questions like this, make sure you get it right. These are fairly no-brainer questions. Political socialization simply means how individuals became to have the political ideas that they have. And incorrect answer choices would be A, it's not the use of private property. It's not how governments communicate with each other. And it's not public attitudes that's measured. It's the idea of political values that are passed on. And one of the ways, the primary way that we adopt our political views is really through our family, right? So that's a pretty straightforward question. And again, it's not that children are trained for successful occupations, although it's not necessarily a bad thing. Okay, question number 33. Which of the following is the most important influence on the choice made by voters in presidential elections? So a similar question that we came across in a prior multiple choice question was, what is the primary determinant on how a Congress member is going to vote on a particular bill? And it really has to do with partisan identification, what political party. And same thing applies to voters. Voters' primary consideration, or you can most accurately predict a presidential candidate or a congressional candidate based on political party affiliation. So what your political party is, partisan identification, is the primary means by which an individual chooses a candidate or not. Not the party platform, not the VP running mates, not endorsements, and not appeal of candidate spouses. Although you can argue that all four of these are actually important in how you choose when you vote for president. Okay, question number 34. What are the advantages of incumbency? So let's take a look. So incumbents receive more money, more campaign contributions. So more campaign contributions, absolutely. If you're an incumbent, you're probably going to raise more money, absolutely. Number two, incumbents are able to provide more services for individual voters. Absolutely. Incumbents are going to help you out with your Social Security. They're going to write nominations for you, for maybe your son or daughter if they want to apply to West Point. So they provide tangible services, and that's just a distinct advantage that you as a congressman, as an incumbent, have over a challenger. What is not an advantage? Government does not provide funds. So governments provide funds. That is not true for elections. You are responsible for raising your own. President endorses incumbents for re-election. Usually the president is going to stay out of the race just because there's 435 elections, and so it's really not worth the president's time. Once in a while, the president may endorse a candidate, but generally speaking, the president is not really going to go out of his way to interject himself in a lowly House campaign. President probably has a little bit more to worry about, and most American voters believe Congress does a good job. The reality is that, and again, this is kind of the idea. Your congressman or your congresswoman, your congressperson equals good. And overall Congress equals bad. Again, very simple way of looking at things, but just like individuals, if they talk about the post office, they think, oh, it's inefficient. But if you're asked, do you like your postal worker? Most individuals say, yes, I do like my postal worker. So just like anything else, individually, because a congressman provides individual benefits, most people think that they do a great job individually, but as Congress as a whole, absolutely not. So the correct answer is going to be A, which is 1 and 2 only. So A is the correct answer. Okay, question number 35 deals with procedures in the House and the Senate. So the House and the Senate, what are the correct way that things are organized in the House and in the Senate? And so A deals with debate by a determined minority in either chamber cannot be halted. That's not true. In the House, you can set the rules so there's only 5 minutes for debate. Whereas in the Senate, senator is permitted as much time as he or she wants. The rules in each chamber are determined by majority whip. No. The Rules Committee, they're labeled as such because they determine the rules of debate. The rules are specified in Article 1. No. Congress, basically, they determine the rules and how they determine the procedures, both in the House and the Senate. D, the rules can be changed by the president during a national emergency. No. The president has no jurisdiction over that particular category. The House operates by more formal rules, while the Senate is informal. Absolutely. House is formal simply because there are 435 of them. And the Senate is going to be informal because they're a gentleman institution, and there's 100 members of that institution, so a lot of informal arrangements can be made. Whereas in the House, you got to be a little bit more strict. Okay, question number 36. So 36 deals with procedures for removal of president. So removal of president. So let's look at choice A here. The House and Senate vote for impeachment, and the Supreme Court votes for guilty verdict. That's incorrect. Supreme Court, they kind of act as more of presiding over the trial, so to speak. So Rehnquist at the most recent President Clinton's impeachment and removal hearing, he was there, but it's the senators that kind of act as a jury. Supreme Court doesn't really have a significant role in the impeachment proceedings. B, the House votes for impeachment and the Senate conducts the trial and reaches a guilty verdict. Correct. So the correct answer is the House impeach and the Senate convict. So that is the correct response. Okay, what is another incorrect response is the House and Senate both vote for impeachment. It's only a House duty. Only the House votes for a bill of impeachment. Well, again, the House does vote for impeachment, but the Senate also votes to convict as well. And criminal court finds the president guilty. No, that is actually not the case here. Okay, 37, interest groups and political parties, they promote democracy by doing what? So interest groups, what's kind of a commonality of interest groups and political parties? Okay. Do they express detailed ideologically distinct programs? No, they do not both do that. Do they both centralize public authority? No, they actually serve to decentralize a lot of the authority. Do they link citizens to the political process? Very good, they do. They link citizens. So this is what's referred to as linkage institutions. So again, it's interest groups and political parties are ways that individual citizens can participate in the affairs of government. Okay, what's another incorrect response? D, increased domination by elites. That is not true. And lobby members of Congress. No, political parties, they're not going to lobby members of Congress. I mean, they're part of Congress. I mean, these political parties, they serve to get members elected, but once they're there, they're in a position to govern themselves. Whereas interest groups, yes, they do want to lobby members of Congress. Okay, question number 38. Which of the following statements accurately describes how the Supreme Court basically decides what cases to decide on? So this question really deals with Supreme Court case selection. And again, the correct answer is really going to be Supreme Court decides what court cases are significant, and we want to rule on this. So really, it's a matter of what the Supreme Court wants to do. So they can basically do whatever they want. So the most correct answer would be which of the following? Is it A, U.S. Constitution spells out all the categories? No. The Supreme Court has incredible freedom. Is it the Chief Justice has authority to select all the things? No, there's something called the Rule of Four. So the Rule of Four, basically, as long as 4 justices agree to hear it, then they're going to hear it. Solicitor General determines the Supreme Court? No. Supreme Court is free to choose with very few limitations, right? Very good. That would be the correct answer. Supreme Court chooses with few limitations. Again, one of the limitations being that there's got to be 4 of them that want to actually put the case on the docket. Another incorrect choice is the Attorney General screens the court cases. In Supreme Court, they're a very proud organization, so they're going to want to choose what cases to hear, so they're going to maintain their autonomy, especially in terms of what court cases they're going to hear. Okay, question number 39. The boundaries of districts are usually determined by what? Boundaries of congressional districts. So how are they determined? It's definitely not determined by the FEC. Okay. It is usually determined by state legislatures. Now, in California, there was actually a citizens commission. It used to be drawn up by the legislature, but because of kind of the gerrymandering process, there's a special commission that was set out to draw the boundary lines. So again, it really depends on the state, but a lot of the states actually have the state legislature do that. So it's not the House Rules Committee. Okay. It is not by the Conference Committee, and certainly not by the Director of the Census Bureau. Okay, question number 40. 40 deals with public monies. So where are public monies help finance? Okay, this one's kind of interesting because you kind of have to think about, okay, public money is going to the benefit of the entire public, right? So the three different categories dealing with presidential, congressional, and gubernatorial, so basically governors' elections. Well, you would want to rule out governors simply because it's a state concern, so they're not going to use taxpayer money for that. And there's two lines of reasoning why you might go with president or Congress. Well, you might go for Congress because, you know, maybe they're the ones that require the most help, so maybe there's a system in place, but really there is none. And it really wouldn't be fair because there's so many different congressional races. So to give money to one congressional race, you'd have to give money to all. So there is a system for the presidential race. So actually there is a box where you can check on your tax returns where public money is spent. So you're not donating an additional $3. Basically there's a box that says that $3 of tax money that I'm already required to pay, I don't mind using for presidential election fund. So that's basically how it can be funded. Now, if it's the case where you opt out of the public system, then you don't get any of that money. But again, that money is there for the presidential campaign. So the correct answer is just A, which is one only. Okay, question number 41. Okay, 41 actually deals with the following. Diversity of public policy is primarily a consequence of what? So diversity of public policy. What that means is that at the state level, there's certain things. At the national level, there's certain things. At the local level, there are other things. And the reason why we have such a diversity and not uniformity is federalism. For example, Colorado and Washington, they basically pass laws allowing for recreational use of marijuana, whereas at the federal level, it's still illegal. So what's the correct thing? It's illegal from a federal level, but it's legal from a state level. So that wouldn't happen if authority just came top down. But because we have a system of federalism, we have some state laws and we have some federal laws, and sometimes they will be redundant and sometimes they're going to conflict. So the answer is because of federalism, not because of separation of powers, not the innovation of bureaucratic agencies. That's seems to be polar opposite. It's not decentralization of Senate, and it's not lack of party discipline in the House. Okay, question number 42. 42 deals with increase of presidential power. So what has contributed to the increase of president's power since post-1945 era? Actually, the question is, all of the following have caused an increase in the president's power except. So one of those except questions here. So let's see which ones have increased presidential power. So tensions between the U.S. and Soviet during Cold War. Absolutely. So Cold War tensions. Absolutely. So because I put a check mark onto it, it's incorrect. Is there an increase in public expectations for services from the federal government? Yes. Expectations that the government is going to provide services. Okay, people want their Social Security. They want their unemployment checks. They want the government to provide everything. That's just kind of the reality. Economic and domestic problems such as inflation, unemployment, and civil rights. Economic, domestic problems. More problems You want leadership. You want the president to do something, and so that's kind of the idea behind that. Increase in U.S. involvement in foreign affairs, absolutely. Increase in foreign affairs. So you have a more activist foreign policy approach, and so naturally that's going to increase the president's powers. What hasn't increased the president's powers, though, is legislation granting presidents to impound congressional funds. That is not a power that the president has. So that would be the correct answer, which is E. Okay, number 43. One of the formal tools that Congress can use to oversee the bureaucracy. So Congress can oversee bureaucracy by doing which of the following? Okay, do they use the line item veto? No. Line item veto, again, it was declared unconstitutional, but it's when the president signs parts of the bill and rejects other parts of the bill. That's unconstitutional. The president can either sign the bill or veto the bill in its entirety. Correct answer is authorization of spending. So if the bureaucracy is being inefficient, then the power of the purse, the Congress can kind of not authorize the spending. So B is the correct answer. It's not impoundment bills. Okay, it's not private bills, and it's not senatorial courtesy. Okay, question number 44. Under the Warren Court, they did all the following except which of the following? So they did everything except what? So in 44, okay, what is the Warren Court not known for? Did they rule against malapportionment in state legislatures? Yes, they did. Did they void statutes that permitted segregation? Permitting segregation? Absolutely. And this was most notably in Brown v. Board. Did they invalidate state abortion statutes? No. They did not invalidate abortion statutes. Basically, it was more of a state issue at the time, and by 1973, abortion became legal within the first trimester. Did they expand the rights of criminal defendants? Yes. Most notably the Miranda rights. And also Gideon versus Wainwright. And did they increase protection for First Amendment freedoms? Yes, they did. So what they did not do is C, which is they did not invalidate abortion statutes. Okay, question number 45 deals with the Miranda warning. What is this Miranda warning? Basically, it was there as part of the Warren Court to basically give criminal defendants the right against self-incrimination and inform them that they have the right to remain silent. So they basically they wanted to give criminal defendants the right against unfair police interrogation. So that's the answer, A, unfair police interrogation. What it was not, it had nothing to do with biased jury selection, imprisonment without trial, illegal wiretapping, or unjustified police surveillance. Okay, 46. The reserved powers of state governments can best be described by what? So reserved powers of the state government is which of the following? And A is a good explanation, right? If it's not given to the national directly, or not explicitly denied to the state. And this is actually found in the 10th Amendment. So if it's not given to the national government and it's not denied to the states, then it's reserved to the states. So this is a case to be made for states' rights. It's not implied in the 5th Amendment. It's not listed specifically in the 10th Amendment. So although it is described as such, it's not listed specifically in the 10th Amendment. And it's not exercised by the state and national, just by the state. And it's not granted to states as part of the implied powers doctrine. Okay, question number 47. So 47 deals with a critical election. So what is a critical election? So some can argue that 2008 election might have been a critical election. So critical election, is it a result of a temporary shift of a coalition supporting one party? No. Is it whenever a third party has secured more than 15%? No, but when a third party candidate gets that amount in the polls, then he or she can be included in the presidential debates, which is what happened with Ross Perot in 1992. Is it when each time a Republican has been elected president? No. A Republican being elected president can be a critical election, but that's not the definition. Is it when voter turnout has decreased significantly? No. Usually there's going to be a lot more political participation. It's when groups of voters have changed their traditional patterns. So there's change in traditional patterns. For example, you might look at 1932 when FDR was elected president, where that could be considered as a critical election. And some have argued that 2008 you saw a shift more towards democratic loyalties. Okay, question number 48. 48 deals with 18 and 21-year-olds. Okay, so 18 and 21-year-olds were given the right to vote as a result of the 26th Amendment. Now, the question that this is trying to test is, what was the impact? Okay, so now 18-year-olds are allowed to vote, 19, 20, and 21-year-olds. So what's going to happen? How are they going to impact the political system? And the answer was it A, they voted for Republican candidates overwhelmingly? No. B, they voted for Democratic candidates overwhelmingly. Not for that election, but you can make the argument that that is the case. Younger people will tend to vote Democrats, but not at the time. Voted overwhelmingly for radical candidates? No. And the answer is that D, they turned out a lower rate than the rest of the electorate. So lower rates. So what percentage or what segment of the population tends to vote the most? And it really is the senior citizen population. And so that's why a lot of the policies that is enacted by politicians actually favor senior citizens as opposed to younger folks, because the truth of the matter is that if you're 7 years old, you're probably going to vote. If you're 19 years old, less than 50% chance that you're going to vote. Okay, and then the last incorrect choice would be turned out the same rate as the rest of the electorate. So that is incorrect. All right, question number 49. 49. The largest amount of political coverage in newspapers. So political coverage in newspapers. So what are people going to cover? What are newspapers cover? What are going to cover? What is the internet going to cover? And the terminology associated with this is, you have horse race journalism. So again, given a piece comparing the specific policy agenda of Mitt Romney versus Obama, what is going to be more covered in depth? What's going to be more front page? Policy differences, or what happened in the polls for the Iowa primary? And the answer is the polls are going to have a little bit more significance simply because this idea that individuals, they want to know, they look at politics as kind of a competition. They want to know who's winning rather than knowing the specific policy details of a particular candidate. That being the case, the answer for number 49 is going to be the day-to-day activities. So that's what people want. So that's what these reporters are going to report. What they are not going to report as much is the platforms of the major parties, the candidate stands on domestic issues, the candidate stands on foreign policy issues, or the candidate's experience and qualifications. Not that they're not important, simply because media is a for-profit enterprise in the United States. What's going to be more important is kind of the results. People want to know what happened, and newspapers are going to cater towards consumer demands. Okay, number 50 deals with a state having 11 electoral votes. Okay, so let's say you have 11 electoral votes, and the Democrat gets 48% of the votes. The Republican gets 40% of the votes, and the Independent gets up to 12% of the vote. So how is the Electoral College votes going to be determined in most states? Some states it's not necessarily the case, but really it's that the Democrat, because he's won 48%, he gets 11 electoral votes. The Republican gets 0, and the Independent gets 0. This terminology is called winner take all. So our Electoral College system pretty much has this winner take all mentality rather than proportionally assigning electoral votes based on the percentage of votes. That being said, is it true that Democrat will receive 5, Republican 4, Independent 2? No. Democrat 6, Republican 5? No. And the correct answer is going to be C, which is the Democrats get all 11 votes. Okay. Now, votes will not be allocated unless there's a runoff election? No. House of Representatives will determine the allocation? No. So clearly, there are some pros and cons to this. I would say the major con or the major benefit from this is that the third party is going to be shut out. So if you're the third party, or if you're an independent candidate, very little chance you're going to win any electoral votes because like Ross Perot, he won 19% of the vote in 1992, which showed that he had some appeal nationwide. But because his appeal was spread out pretty evenly across the country, he got a grand total of 0 electoral votes because he never had a plurality in that situation. So again, there are some benefits to having a winner-take-all system, and there are also some disadvantages. Okay, question number 51 deals with political parties. What's an accurate description of political parties? So political parties is, do they increasingly identify themselves with coherent ideologies to attract large blocks? No. Again, the whole idea of a political party, you're trying to welcome as many people. So the more detailed you are, and the more explicit in the ideology, you're gonna turn away a lot of voters, so to speak here. The percentage of voters identifying as Democrats or Republicans have declined since the 1970s here. So basically, decline of Democrats and Republican membership, which is basically another way of saying the rise of independence. And basically it's saying that when you poll people, are you Republican or Democrat, the more common response is that, no, I'm not affiliated with any party. And so, whereas in the middle of the 20th century, you had more individuals that were staunchly Republican or Democrat. Through the 70s and 80s and 90s, the trend was that there was less individuals that aligned themselves with one party. Now, obviously, people still voted for Democrats and Republicans, but basically they didn't identify as much with membership through a political party. People might hold on to certain values, but when polled, they say that they're not part of either party, they're independent, and they vote based on the candidate. Okay, so that was question not number 21, but number 51. Okay, question number 52. Congressional power that has been contested most frequently has been what in the courts? Congressional power contested. Let's go over 51. Go back to 51, the incorrect answer choices. National Party are generally the strongest party. No, it's usually the local. It's increasingly difficult for third parties to gain more than 2%. No, you can get more than 2%. And most candidates prefer to run as independents rather than Democrat or Republican. No. If you run as independent, chances are you're not going to get a whole lot of support. All right, what is contested most frequently? Establishing post offices? No, relatively uncontroversial. Coining money? No. Levying taxes? No. Regulating commerce with foreign nations? No. What has been contested over time is the power to regulate interstate commerce. Most notably, and again, I went over this in one of the lectures, is that does Congress have the right to ban, does Congress have the right to outlaw guns in schools? And the majority of the Supreme Court basically said no, that that power to regulate interstate commerce is just too loose. The idea that you bring a gun to school and individuals who go to school to go to college, or they go to high school to go to college, they go to college to get a job, they get a job in order to participate in the broader economy, and therefore that's part of commerce, and Congress has the power to regulate interstate commerce. And again, in U.S. versus Lopez, the Supreme Court ruled that no, that power has extended far beyond what the founders had intended. Okay, question number 53. So the answer is E right here. 53. What's an accurate statement about committees in Congress? So committees in Congress, what is something that is true? What is the true statement found here? The work of committee ends when it submits the bill to the House. No, you can argue that's when it begins, right? So you work out a bill and it goes to the floor of the House. It's got to pass. It's got to go through the other House. It's got to pass. It goes through conference committee. It goes back to the floors of the House. It passes in the exact same wording, and then it goes to the president. So no, it does not end there. Individual representative can serve only on one committee and one subcommittee. No, that's not true. The only exception being the exclusive committees of Rules, Appropriations, and Ways and Means. So B is also incorrect. Membership on key committees such as House Rules and Senate Finance is limited to fixed terms. No, there's no such fixed terms limit. And the correct answer is D. Standing committees oversee bureaucracy's implementation of legislation. So standing committees, again, they're permanent fixtures. They're the ones that oversee the bureaucracy. And E also is incorrect. And what is E? E is committee recommendations have little influence on floor voting. And that's not true. All the work in committees, their recommendations are taken very seriously by other members of the House. Okay, question number 54. Requests of recent presidents for line item veto, it's been challenged. Why? Why is the line item veto been challenged? What, according to what principle? And I think I've mentioned this indirectly several times. And the correct answer is A, separation of powers. And why is it separation of powers? So imagine there are two parts of a bill that Congress passed. And let's say I were the president. I liked Part A of the bill, but I didn't like Part B. Well, if I accept Part A and I veto Part B, then what I'm doing, I'm exercising the line item veto, and that's unconstitutional because what I'm basically doing, rather than just giving the power to accept or veto, sign a bill or veto, now I'm getting to pick and choose as president, and now that gives me legislative powers that the founding fathers never intended. Now, again, the only way really around that is to amend the Constitution to give the president the ability to do that. But unless that is given, it is the constitutional authority of Congress to create legislation and the president's authority to either approve or to veto the legislation. So line item veto, again, infringes upon the idea of separation of powers. What are some incorrect answer choices? Not senatorial courtesy, although senatorial courtesy does kind of flip the roles of the Senate and the presidency. But that's not really the line item veto that's being challenged there. Eminent domain, no. Is it executive privilege? Is it executive privilege? No. Is it congressional oversight? No. So question number 55. What is the iron triangle? So iron triangle, again, to draw the iron triangle here, so you have the bureaucracy here. Now, bureaucracy, another way of saying bureaucracy is actually executive agency. Okay, and then another angle here is the congressional committee. And the final point of the iron triangle is going to be the interest group. So the answer is not A. It's not President, Congress, Supreme Court. It's not President, House Majority Leader, Senate Majority Leader. It's not the interest group, Senate Majority Leader, House Majority Leader. It's not the Executive Department, House Majority Leader, and President. It's going to be E, which is the Executive Department, which is the bureaucracy. It's going to be the Congressional Committee. And then you're going to have the interest group. Those are the 3 points of the iron triangle. Okay, question number 56. An election involving more than 2 candidates in which the person who receives the most votes is the winner is called what type of election? So 3 candidates. So you have 3 candidates. And again, this was kind of covered in a previous question, not so directly, but let's say one candidate wins 40%, another wins 30%, and the other wins 30%. And the winner of this election, if it's determined to be the one with the 40%, what kind of election is it? Is that a majority election? No. Majority election would mean you have to get 51% of the vote. Is it proportional? No. If it's proportional, then, this idea of in the electoral college where, 40% gets 4 votes and then 3 votes and then 3 votes. And it's basically a plurality election. So the person who has the most votes wins. So we kind of have a mixture of plurality and majority. In order to win all the electoral votes, you have to have the plurality of votes. In order to win the presidency, you have to have the majority of the electoral votes. And if you don't have the majority of electoral votes in the electoral college, then the House decides who wins the presidency, and you have to have a majority. And then the Senate gets to choose the winner of the vice presidency. So we kind of have like a plurality majority type system where there's some aspects that are plurality elections versus some in which you have to have a majority of electoral votes. Okay, so D is incorrect as well. It's not a simple election, and it's not an indirect election as well. Okay, 57. This is something I went over very explicitly when I went over the presidency and the bureaucracy. Cabinet members often do not have a dominant influence on presidential decision-making. Why not? So cabinet members' limited influence because which of the following? Okay. Is it A, cabinet members generally maintain close independent ties to Congress? No. They're in charge of their own bureaucratic organization. Is it because cabinet members generally view their position as a stepping stone to further their own political ambitions? You know what? It is possible, but most cabinet members do not see this as necessarily a stepping stone. Maybe the most prominent cabinet members, but again, most cabinet members are not gonna. This is usually the top of where they're gonna go in terms of politically. So B is incorrect. Is it cabinet members are not permitted to disagree publicly with the president? Absolutely, they can. Is it D? Presidential goals often conflict with the goals of the institutional members? Absolutely. Conflict in goals. So again, if you're the Secretary of State, yes, you're appointed by the president, but your job is to run the State Department. And that may or may not coincide with the interests of serving the president. Whereas if you're part of the executive office of the president, if you're the chief of staff, then your goal is to protect the president and promote his agenda. Whereas if you're the Secretary of State, you might have an incentive to make yourself look good, possibly at the expense of the president. And that certainly has been the case, sometimes more publicly with some department heads with the president. So that has happened in the past. And E, only half of all cabinet members can be members of the president's party. Now, that's incorrect. Although, again, presidents will usually, have a token member in his or her cabinet that's of the opposing political party. And sometimes it's a prominent position, but generally speaking, you're going to choose cabinet members that belong to your political party. Okay, question number 58. Fundamental source for the power of the federal bureaucracy. So where does the power of the federal bureaucracy come in? And so without looking at the answer choices, really the power of the federal bureaucracy is that they have a lot of discretionary power in terms of how they implement congressional laws. So put that to the side. So they have discretionary power to implement laws. So role in moving legislation out of subcommittee? No. Is it the role in mediating interstate conflicts? No. Is it the ability to convince Congress to support projects it supports? No. Is it the ability to mobilize public opinion in support of legislative initiatives? No. The reason why there's power in the federal bureaucracy is because they can set specific guidelines, which is another way of saying discretionary power, to general mandates. So Congress can basically give orders to a bureaucracy to do this, but they don't specify how. So there's a lot of discretionary power to set specific guidelines that Congress mandates. Okay, question number 59. The establishment of the First Amendment does which of the following? Okay, the Establishment Clause. Remember, there are two clauses in the First Amendment dealing with freedom of religion. So the Establishment Clause basically says that no religion will be officially established in the United States, whereas the Free Exercise Clause means that you are able to exercise your religion in how you see fit. So the Establishment Clause actually prohibits setting up of a state church. So that's a very straightforward answer. It does not guarantee freedom of speech to everybody. It does not prohibit prior restraint. Okay, that's freedom of the press. What it does do is it prohibits the building of state churches. Or for that matter, again, not only does it prohibit state churches, but the Supreme Court has ruled that even voluntary prayer led by teachers at school would be considered unconstitutional because the teacher at a public school would represent the state. And so there are certain things that would be considered unconstitutional. Even prayers at graduation, technically they would be considered unconstitutional. Now, does it happen? I'm sure it happens all the time, but even prayers at public functions like state graduation or at school graduations would technically be considered unconstitutional. Okay, does Establishment Clause define the concept of dual citizenship? No way. Does it allow citizens to enter freely into contracts with other citizens? No. And the final question, number 60. Griswold v. Connecticut, and Roe v. Wade. Are similar Supreme Court cases because of what? So what are the similarities? So chances are, if you're taking this test, you know what Roe v. Wade is about. This allowed for abortion. Now, even if you didn't know what Griswold versus Connecticut was, you should be able to answer this simply because if you know the reasoning behind why abortion was allowed, then you're going to know the Griswold decision as well. And it's really the Griswold decision that paved the way for the Roe v. Wade decision. And let's take a look at what the answer choices are here. Is it because they were similar in the rights of gay men and lesbian women? Well, you know that Roe v. Wade deals with abortion, so again, if you don't know what Griswold is, A is incorrect. B, the right to privacy. Let's just leave that as a possible answer here. So the right to privacy. Okay. C is the right to an abortion. Okay, so again, that might be, so the right to abortion definitely is kind of granted in Roe v. Wade. So we'll leave that as a possible answer choice. Right to freedom from cruel and unusual punishment. Again, that's the Eighth Amendment. So that is incorrect. So this is, again, if you know all the amendments just by heart, it helps you in narrowing down incorrect answer choices. The right of women to equal protection before the law. Again, because you know this is dealing with abortion, that's also incorrect. So a lot of people might put C in there, but what Griswold versus Connecticut basically did was, this was a Connecticut law that prohibited the use of contraceptives. And so basically, the Supreme Court ruled, no, this law is unconstitutional because there's an implied right to marital privacy in this case, the right to privacy, what you decide to do with your own body, it's up to you. And so that was kind of the idea, well, you have the right to privacy, you can use contraceptives or not. And that kind of led to the Roe v. Wade, well, you have the right to privacy, therefore you have the right to an abortion, which is implied with the right to privacy. Now, there's a lot of people that disagree vehemently with that, with whether or not the Constitution actually grants this right of privacy, which leads to the right of abortion. But that is the current way that the Supreme Court has issued with the issue of abortion. It's that not that the right to abortion is directly stated in the Constitution, but it's an implied right because the right to privacy also leads to the right to an abortion. So the answer is not C, right to abortion, but Griswold and Roe v. Wade, they share the commonality of having the right to privacy. Thank you for watching educator.com.